Qui-Gon is fighting because he knows he's the father that Anakin needs.
Do I look?
Hello boyos, Rich Boy J here back with another video, and this is going to be another episode of Your Questions Answered. Before I get into the video, I want to give a very special thanks to Shmee Nuggies, aka Julian HSSF from the Discord. You made an awesome intro. It made me laugh a lot. I really do appreciate you for making that. But you guys know the name of the game. This is the Your Questions Answered series. If you want to see one of your questions answered in one of these videos, leave it in the comment section below. Make sure it is Lego, Star Wars, or Lego Star Wars related, and then check back next week to see if you made the cut. First question this week is from RoboNut03. He says, question, how do you decide what part of a vehicle to start with when designing a Star Wars vehicle? I do just want to say very special thanks to RoboNut03 for always coming with some really good, insightful questions. He's just been on a roll lately. Like, great job, man. I really do appreciate you contributing so much to your questions answered. But for this question, he wants to know where to start when designing a Star Wars vehicle. I feel it can vary from vehicle to vehicle. Sometimes there's a specific feature of a vehicle that you think really translate into Lego. Like, you see it and you're just like, I know exactly how to build that. And you might start with that first. Other times you might be more concerned with just getting the scale of the vehicle. So you'll start with something that's pretty easy to scale, like the cockpit or a door, or something that's like very easy to see how a minifig might look next to it scale wise. So those are two things that I think you can just easily start with right away. In an ideal world, you might start with the frame first. The frame's a pretty important part to the vehicle, and it can kind of give you some intuition as to how things need to connect to it and just how the ship will come together as a whole. Unfortunately, in practicality, that doesn't really work out that way. Probably will more often end up just creating certain exterior sections and then trying to make your frame fit into that. What you can realize when you're trying to do the frame first is that you might start compromising parts of your design to get it to fit in with the frame. And I don't really like that. I don't like having to compromise design because of that. So if you don't build the frame first, if you instead build your frame to basically try to accommodate your design, I think you might just end up with a better looking model. So like I said, it really just depends on the vehicle, but some of the things I like to do to just start first to really get the creative juices flowing, the build juices flowing, are to just start with, you know, what I think can translate in the most easiest way to Lego, and then that can, for one, just give me a starting place, because oftentimes finding out where to start with a vehicle can be the most frustrating and anxiety inducing aspect of building mocks. So if you can just even get that start and get the ball rolling, you oftentimes can find the build process is a lot smoother than you might think it is. Next question comes from JNH Bricks. He says, what is the best thing about building a large scale mock? I really like this question too. Building large scale mocks is fulfilling in so many different ways. If I'd like to narrow it down to what I think is the best thing about it, I would say just being able to create something that you experience in the theater or in a book or in a comic or just on your TV screen, as close to the way that it's presented on screen. When you build large scale, you really get the opportunity to create things without compromising it. Like, obviously, there's a lot of things you can build in Star Wars pretty faithfully that doesn't require many tables. And conversely, there are many other parts of Star Wars where you need massive amounts of space to recreate what you've seen on screen, like the battle scenes especially. So being able to do something like that, being able to recreate that as accurately as possible without compromising, having the ships be the right scale, having the battlefield be the right size, using as many figures or like characters as are used in the actual scene on screen is just very fulfilling to me. Whenever I build any large scene, I want it to feel holistic. I want you to be able to capture the entire essence of that scene in the build, and building at large scale just maximizes your ability to do that, in my opinion. Next question comes from Matthew Productions. He says, how do you feel about EA stopping Battlefront 2 updates right when it gets good, and how have they used the Star Wars game license? Thanks if you pick mine. This is a great question for so many reasons. I really don't have a really insightful answer to the first part where you're just asking, like, how do I feel about them stopping Battlefront 2 before it got good. I never thought Battlefront 2 was bad. I got it right when it came out, and I thought the story mode was very fulfilling. I didn't really play the story mode back in the day from like the original Battlefronts, but I know at least Battlefront 2, I think that's the first one that had an actual story mode. It was basically just kind of glorified standard Battlefront instant action missions. Like, there was a story, but the gameplay was pretty static all the way through it, and that's kind of what I expected for this game. I thought that the story would just be a bunch of your typical Battlefront multiplayer missions, but kind of with a more pointed objective, if that makes sense. And it wasn't that at all. I really got invested in Iden Versio's character. I love the locations we got to visit. I love the story in itself. A lot of people criticize it and say that her turn to the rebels happened too quickly, and I agree. It certainly could have been a longer story in that regard, but I really felt for her character. Like, I liked the position that she was put in, being that she had familial ties to the Empire, and that she basically got to see the worst parts of it actually affect her. Oftentimes in Star Wars, we see, like, Tarkin, for example, he can just kind of whimsically decide to blow up a planet because it doesn't really affect him. But when the tables turn and you see that the Empire doesn't even care about you as a person, it's always going to be about their mission, and you might get in the way, like something that matters to you might get in the way. I thought that was just a very interesting story point that I had never seen in Star Wars. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. In fact, I'm almost sure it has happened, but seeing it unfold for the first time for me was just very nice. So I really did appreciate that story. Second part of this question, because I realize I'm getting kind of off topic. That being said, how do I feel with what EA has done with the Star Wars game license? Honestly, I feel like they've really dropped the ball. It's so unfortunate that, like, in this period where we're getting so much Star Wars content, TV shows, movies, the comic books, all this stuff, like, we are at no shortage of a Star Wars content at all. The games have just failed in comparison. Like, think about to the early to mid 2000s when LucasArts was at the helm. Like, they were much more creative and willing to take chances and risks with the Star Wars games, but it seems like every Star Wars game now has to be this big AAA game that has this, like, super important, like, tie-in to the overall Star Wars narrative. Like, it can't just be its own thing. Like, a lot of people enjoyed Fallen Order. I personally didn't care for Fallen Order, but even that, like, at the end, and this is a spoiler alert, like, Vader has to be involved, and I don't know, that's just kind of cheap in my opinion. Like, why can't the Star Wars games be like they used to be, where you could do a game on a character like Jango Fett, who, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, he's not really a super important character, but you can just give him, like, an interesting backstory and, like, play as a bounty hunter. Like, that's just kind of cool, and explore new Star Wars worlds and scenarios kind of under that circumstance. It's not really related to the main storyline. It's not Rebels versus Empire. It's just something that can kind of stand on its own. And I really think we've been starved for just good Star Wars games, like an RPG especially. Given the popularity of Knights of the Old Republic, it blows my mind that they haven't tried in the least bit to capitalize on that. Knights of the Old Republic is my favorite Star Wars game. It's probably my favorite piece of Star Wars content, excluding, like, the original trilogy. And I would really like something that could come even close to that. And the Star Wars games, since EA has had a stranglehold on the license, have not come close to that. And that's very unfortunate. There's going to be a little bit of a weird cut right here, so let me go ahead and explain that to you guys real quick. If you're wondering why I've changed clothes, well, it's because I had a bit of a mental breakdown. Seeing everyone online with the 501st Battle Pack so early, knowing I have to be in the US and waiting for it, has not been good for my psyche whatsoever. I haven't been getting much sleep, and life has just generally been rough. I'm trying to hang in there, but it's hard, man. It's difficult. So next question comes from Porter Reed. He says, before mocks, do you plan out your budget, the layout, etc.? That's a decent question. Mocks budgets, I do not plan out. I probably should. I just don't. It's so difficult to plan something like that out when you're building large scale builds, because so much of it depends on the design process, and I mean, you just don't know how you're going to design certain things until you get to that point. There's ways I could do it, but just for my own well-being and knowledge, I'd rather not. I spend what I can, and when I can't, I will just try to put it off or extend the build process until I can get funds to afford a certain part of a mock. Fortunately for me, I've gotten to a point where I've built up my collection to where I'm not spending tons of money on basic parts. Most of the money I spend is on specific things, and as you build more and more, you end up with more of those parts to go around. So I've just been trying to build up my collection to get to a point where I don't have to spend significant amounts of money on every mock. Regardless of how big your collection is, like if you're doing large scale builds, it's going to cost some money, but I don't think my mocks cost as much as you guys might think they do, just given the existing parts collection that I have. The layout is probably the one thing that I do extensively plan out. One cool thing that I do with any mock that I'm building that is going to include big vehicles of some sort is I'll try to find either like an LDD version of it if I know that I've already built the vehicle, for example my AT-AT walker, or some other like digital version of a build that's comparable to that size, and I'll lay out base plates digitally and I'll put the vehicles wherever they're going to be. And that's just an easy way to check the sizing of your builds. I know early on in my build career this wasn't something that I considered, so I ended up in a situation where like I had these big vehicles and they were just too close together, like it felt too cluttered. So I'd like to make sure every individual element of the build has space to breathe, so to speak, and laying things out digitally, at least the parts that you have a good idea of what they're gonna look like and the rough size of them, is a good way to make sure that you're planning ahead and you're not gonna end up with a crowded mock. Next question comes from Slotty Productions, and this is a good one. He says, when did you get good at building? I appreciate the compliment for one, but that's hard to say because even at this point I feel with any different build I do comes new challenges and new things that I've never had to design before. So I just always try to do my research and do my homework and just like explore a variety of techniques. I always tell people one of the best ways to just get good and technically sound at building is to just familiarize yourself with other people's mocks. Like take a moment out of every day and just look at a different mock and look at how someone has implemented something, and those techniques will subconsciously settle in your head. You'll have a good idea for things that you like and things that maybe you don't like. So when you have to design something like that, you'll have an idea of the direction you want to go in, and on the converse you'll have an idea of like something you might not want to pursue because you've seen someone else do it and you don't necessarily like how it was achieved. Like my AT-AT walker was the first minifig scale vehicle I did that I tried to be very accurate with and just recreate exactly what you see on screen. At the time I thought that thing was amazing. I was like super impressed with myself, but in hindsight there's so many things I would change about it. So like if you asked me back then, like, are you good at building? I probably would have been like, yeah. But in hindsight, I would say like, no, I still had a lot of things to learn even after I designed that model. So even at this point, there's certain things that I've built that I'm very proud of and certain things that I just haven't built yet. Like I haven't built a ton of natural landscapes that aren't salt or snow. And those are things that I'd like to do at some point. So once I feel I have a more well-rounded catalog of building, I think at that point I feel I'm just generally good at building. Next question comes from Galador Knight. He says, what is your favorite Mandalorian minifigure ever made? I have to go with the Slave One, the original UCS Slave One Boba Fett. This same figure has appeared in at least one other set. I know it comes in the Cloud City set since then. But at the time, it was such a big deal because it was the most detailed version of Boba Fett we got. Until this day, it's still the most detailed version of Boba Fett that we have. I think the arm printing is especially just beneficial for a figure like Boba Fett because he has just so much details literally everywhere on his armor, on his body. So having the arm printing for a figure like that means a lot. And I mean, the Boba Fett armor is iconic, right? Like, even to this day, we see just how far a cool looking character can go in Star Wars, to the point where people still want to see him come back, like not just to see more of his character because he barely has one, but literally just because he looks cool. So Boba Fett I would have to go with for the best Mandalorian figure out there. And the final question comes from Elias Jones. He asks, how long did it take you to go through Brickset and mark off all the minifigs you had and wanted? Bruh, I gave up so long ago. So this actually was not as difficult as you'd think it is. When a long time ago, I basically went through and I cataloged all my sets. And then, since I've been buying sets, every time I get them, I'll just go to Brickset and put in, oh, I have this set. And Brickset does all the hard minifig work for you. Like, it can tell if you have this set, then you have this minifigure. And then basically after that you can go in and maybe pick out specific minifigures you own that you don't necessarily have the set to. Since I've started up the minifig wall series, I think it's just been easy for me to get in that groove since I'm constantly trying to add to the wall, and I know I have to make a video on it anyway, so that's actually the point where I go through and I add those figures into my collection. I would imagine if you weren't doing this like me, if you weren't working on a wall where you could just visually see everything together, it might be a little bit more difficult pulling out figures and trying to discern like, okay, which variation of Obi-Wan is this? But I feel like I'm dealing with Lego Star Wars minifigs so often that it's not a huge deal to me. It doesn't really feel super time consuming, especially at this point where I own such a large percentage of Lego Star Wars minifigures. The last thing I'll leave you guys with is that if you are not cataloging your collection on Brickset, do it. It is so useful for a number of reasons. One, it's nice to just know what you have and you don't have to remember. Most people don't have a hard time remembering their collection off the top of their head, but once your collection gets big enough, like, it can be difficult to remember it. Two, it also just gives you a better view of what minifigs you own, because maybe you will have a set and you won't know if you have a specific variation of a figure, but Brickset can tell you pretty quickly whether or not you have a variation of a specific figure. And three, if you build mocks, this is so helpful. Brickset has a feature where you can just look up parts in sets, right? Like if I want to find out what sets have a 1x2 black brick in it, I can look up what sets have it, and I can also look up what sets in my collection have this piece. So if I'm building something and I don't want to have to wait for a bricklink order and I feel comfortable scalping from my own collection. But that's going to finish things up today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this Your Questions Answered. As always, leave your comments in the comment section below. Keep them Lego Star Wars related, and then check back next week to see if you make the cut. If you like what I do, go ahead, support the video by hitting the like button, support the channel by smashing that subscribe button, and I'll be back again very soon.